Nancy. No running in the hallways. Ah! Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Horror Corner. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Erschen. This week we are doing another movie review. This is A Nightmare on Elm Street. Released in 1984 and directed by the master Wes Craven. So guys, this is the one that started it all, the original Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984. So it's the original, and in my opinion, the best. I know a lot of people pick Dream Warriors, but yeah, for me it's always been the original. It's easily the best for me. It's just loaded with atmosphere. It's very scary, very intense. It's got an absolutely brilliant score, also the best score in the franchise in my opinion. Which, another thing, a lot of people pick Dream Warriors for as the score, but really that has some cool rock songs, but I wouldn't say the score itself is that great. The original is a masterpiece for me. It's one of the greatest scores in horror history. And I actually feel that this is one of the greatest horror films in history. I think a lot of people would say that, you know. It's not just a slasher movie to me, it's more than that, you know. It is that, but it's more than that. This is the film that, of course, put Wes Craven on the map. I mean, he got some buzz going with Last House on the Left, but this one is the one that put him as a force to be reckoned with in horror, you know. And of course the film stars Heather Langenkamp as Nancy Thompson. You got Amanda Wyss in the role of Tina, and a young Johnny Depp in the role of Glenn, Nancy's boyfriend. And of course you have the legendary horror icon Robert Englund in the role of Freddy Krueger, child murderer, who back in the day the parents had tracked him down to a boiler room where he used to take the kids to kill them, a place where he worked, and they all trapped him in the boiler room and set the place on fire and watched it burn, and you know, he died. They killed him. But that didn't stop him from haunting all the teenagers in their dreams. So he's became a dream demon. So yeah, they couldn't destroy the soul of Freddy Krueger because he lives on in the dreams of these young teenagers in Springwood. And they called him the Springwood Slasher when he was doing his business. Yeah, so really great concept for a slasher movie. It's brilliant, I think. The idea of a boogeyman that haunts you in your dreams. I mean, we've all had those dreams, those nightmares that kept you up at night, you know, when there's a boogeyman of some kind chasing you, and just as you're about to get killed, well, you wake up with the sweats, and you know, so we can all relate to that, and I just think that's brilliant for a horror film. And it's done so well by Wes Craven here. We've got some awesome dream sequences, and this is a low-budget movie, and he certainly used the budget to the fullest in all these great dream sequences. And you got these great characters too. Nancy is very relatable. She's the typical teenager, you know. She is like kind of the girl next door. And they're all your typical teenagers. You got the tough guy Rod, who's Tina's boyfriend. You got Glenn, who's kind of a preppy dude. And Tina's kind of somewhere in between, you know. And Freddy as a character is probably the biggest icon in horror history, you know, I would say. I mean, everybody knows who Freddy Krueger is, you know. And that's because of the way Robert Englund plays him. He just owned that role. He commanded the screen. He had those iconic one-liners, and his delivery is just on point always. Brilliant actor. And he just embodied Freddy Krueger. And you see when they tried to replace him in part 2 even, they were going to hire a stuntman to replace Robert Englund. They found out you can't do that. And they also tried to do the remake in 2010, and played by Jack Earl Haley. And you find out you can't do that. You cannot replace Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger. So that's my opinion. So what happens in this film is young Nancy Thompson is being terrorized in her dreams by the boogeyman, as is all her friends. So all her friends are having the same dream about this same guy, and they find that out, and they're like freaking out, So at first it's Tina that's, Freddy's really getting to her, So she invites Nancy over for a sleepover, and her friend Glenn, who's her boyfriend, Johnny Depp. So the idea is to keep a watch over Tina, to make sure she's safe, to make sure she can get a good sleep, and that she survives through the night, basically. And her boyfriend, Rod, they've kind of been having some romantic issues. It's kind of a rocky relationship. But, things are cool for the night. He comes over and they go at it, Well, freaking Nancy and Glenn are in the other room, wishing they were doing that. And while Nancy goes to sleep, you start seeing the wall moving, looking like someone's coming out of the wall, and it's really cool, man. Really cool effect that still holds up pretty damn well. And a lot of the effects in this movie hold up really well. Not all. There are a couple instances where it looks a little bit cheesy, but for the most part, I'd say they work really well. Great gore effects, great makeup job on Robert Englund, really cool dream sequences, amazing score, so everything works so beautifully in this movie, and the direction by Wes Craven is just brilliant, So he established himself as a horror master with this film. And I still think it's the best film in Wes Craven's entire career. What happens with Tina is Freddy does come to visit her, and it's one of the best, probably the best dream sequence in the entire movie, where Freddy is throwing rocks at the window, and she looks out the window, and then she goes outside. It's really dark out, and she's Freddy creeping down the street, and his arms extend 100 feet long, scraping against the walls. It's a really cool scene. It's really creepy. And then he goes, and then Tina's like, "Oh my God," and she's like, "This is God." This is a scene right here, actually. Classic Freddy Krueger. So definitely Freddy as a character is much more of a scary, intimidating presence in this film. Whereas some of the latest sequels, he becomes a little bit more comical. Here he's definitely very serious, very scary. He does have a few classic one-liners, though. But this is definitely a more sinister, intense, and evil Freddy. He's not a lovable plush animal, He's scary, he's for real, and he means business. His ultimate goal is to kill you in your dream. Because that's what happens in the film. If he kills you in your dream, you die for real. And that's just what happens to Tina. It's a really cool dream sequence. Freddy is slashing at her in the dream, and Rod sees her being slashed, but he doesn't see anybody because it's in her dream, but the cuts are happening on her body, and she's like going all across the room, and she goes up on the ceiling and stuff, and the blood's like pouring out of her, really nasty. And that's another great special effects scene that holds up really well today. I know they built like a revolving room to do that shot, which was really cool, but it works so well in the film. And there's several really creative death scenes. So then Nancy is traumatized by this. She goes to Tina's funeral, and she goes to school to try and, get things out of her head, even though her father, played by John Saxon, the late great John Saxon, and John Saxon's character is a sheriff as well in town. So against John Saxon's better judgment, she goes to school, and she starts daydreaming in school, and and Freddy's taunting her in the dream while she's at school. And she starts seeing visions of Tina in a body bag, and like slugs are coming out of her mouth, and snakes are coming out of her. It's really sick. Awesome stuff. And she starts visualizing that she goes down to the basement of the school. Next thing you know, she's in the boiler room, and Freddy's there scraping his nails along stuff. Only they're finger knives, because his hands is made of knives on his fingers, which is a really cool and interesting weapon, for a horror film. Really cool. And at the beginning, you kind of see him building it, hammering it, putting it all together, It's like this metal glove with the metal knives coming out of it. It's really sick. What an iconic look for a boogeyman. At the red and green sweater, and the fedora hat, and the glove. Such an iconic look, Very, very creative design by Wes Craven. So yeah, there's several of the friends that get picked off one by one. Rod gets it, and and of course the most brutal death, the most bloody scene maybe in horror history is Glenn's death. And Nancy's trying to get Glenn to help her in her dream and bring him into the dream so he can help her and they can take on Freddy together, but he ends up falling asleep, of course, Nancy's like, Glenn, don't fall asleep. Of course he does, and he ends up paying the price, because he's laying on his bed, and Freddy comes out of the bed and pulls him under the bed, and you see blood splashing everywhere like a volcano onto the ceiling. It's like hundreds and thousands of gallons of blood, does a person have that much blood in their body? But I don't know, but it looks really cool. And it's a really cool effect for the film. There's another great sequence where Nancy is getting chased by Freddy, and it's got the great pulse-pounding score. And the camera work is amazing when she's running towards the house and she steps in the sludge on the stairs, and that slows her down, and Freddy smashes his glove through the window, and he's got Tina's face on his, and he's like, "Oh, save me, Nancy, save me from Freddy." It's classic. Another great scene when she's trying to call Glenn, and he don't pick up, and his parents won't let him see Nancy anymore, so she hangs up the phone and then unplugs the wire, and then when she walks away, of course the phone starts ringing by itself. And then when she picks up, it's Freddy on the line. You hear the eeet. And then he's like, "I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy," and you can see his tongue come out of the phone. It's awesome. Brilliant stuff. It's so great. So like I said, Freddy's much more serious, and this is a much more serious movie than the later sequels are. But You still get some classic one-liners in there. Oh, and I almost forget the awesome dream sequence when Nancy's in the bathtub, you know. And of course, Freddy's glove comes out of the bathtub right at her face, you know. It's really scary, but then he pulls her under, and it's like this huge underground. It's awesome, dude. Love this movie. I think Nightmare on Elm Street is one of the greatest horror movies ever made. I give it 5 stars. It's an absolute masterpiece, and it's Wes Craven's best movie, in my opinion. So definitely 2 devil horns way up for A Nightmare on Elm Street from 1984, directed by Wes Craven. Thank you for joining me, Sean Patrick Erschen, in the Horror Corner. Tune in and stay scared.